December 3rd, 2019, upstate New York. Cohoes Police and Emergency Medical Services respond to a call for an unresponsive 6-week-old boy. The child is Eli Ojeda, known better in the media as Baby Eli. Hours after arriving at the hospital, Baby Eli passes away. This turned into an international manhunt. It was so important to catch Baby Eli's killers that this case made the U.S. Marshals top 15 most wanted fugitives. I'm Chris Godsick, and this is Chasing Evil. Let me welcome our guest today who investigated, pursued, and apprehended Baby Eli's killer. From the Cohoes Police Department in Cohoes, New York, we have the Chief of Police, Todd Walden. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you.
We have Detective Robert Piazza and retired Detective Matthew LeBombard. How'd I do with that?
Very good, thank you.
Okay, excellent. I've been practicing saying his name for about an hour here. And from the U.S. Marshals, Deputy Commander of the New Jersey, New York Regional Fugitive Task Force. He basically runs upstate New York. Stu Smith, welcome. Senior Inspector Anthony Logadisi and Senior Inspector Sal Reyes from the Pacific Southwest Regional Fugitive Task Force. This case was all-consuming, both mentally and physically. And Chief, before we get into the case, describe the environment for us. What kind of city is Cohoes? What are we looking at? Is it a high crime area? What's the demographic? What's the population? What are you dealing with on a daily basis?
Okay, it's not a high crime area, but it is a small city. As far as upstate is concerned, I guess would be considered a medium-sized city and police department. The population is just under 20,000. So it's not very large geographically, but there's a population density, and that's what determines that it's a city. All those people came into a very small 3-square-mile area.
Are homicides commonplace?
No, generally we average about 1 every 4 years.
A case like this must shock the area.
Well, it does. I mean, even when we have our other homicides, whether they were domestic related or arguments, those ones were shocking enough. But the fact that this one involved a 6-week-old baby made it that much worse.
Right. All right. Well, let's just jump, right into this.
So on December 3rd, 2019, our EMS had responded to 11 Van Beckton Street for an EMS call. It was for a 1-month-old that was blue in color and had difficulty breathing. Once on scene, they had requested that the police respond and the fire captain.
Is that normal for them to request PD?
Yeah, I think the ambulance crew thought something right away something was off. This wasn't normal.
They were pounding on the door and they weren't getting an answer. And as soon as the door had opened, Anthony Ojeda had the child in his hands, but he kind of walked away. So they had to go up to him and almost physically remove the child from his arms. They could see the child was in distress, and then they took the child into the ambulance. And then that's when they called for the fire captain and the police to come down to the scene.
Right.
Shortly after the child was brought down to Albany Med, after speaking to responding officers, Neil Garzone had flown down the street in his vehicle.
And Neil Garzone, let's just say, is Anthony Ojeda's husband.
Correct.
Okay.
Kind of parked his vehicle right in the snowbank, got out of the car, very upset, and actually at one point had passed out into the snowbank. And one of the EMS personnel had to go over and get him out of the snowbank. So there's just some, odd things that were going on.
And when someone turns away from EMS, who's there to help the child, and turns away with the child, is that indicative of the fact that maybe they're under the influence of something? Because that doesn't seem like that's normal behavior.
And that's not normal behavior. You would expect them to be outside waiting for the ambulance to pull up so that you can take off the child to them.
Okay. So you're down at the hospital.
Social worker for Albany Med had called and said the child is unresponsive and it's intubated presently. Want to get some more information on the child because the parents weren't down at the hospital with the child. They don't have any, history or even a name of the child.
Right.
When we initially walked in, he had all the EMS personnel that were kind of lined up outside of the room where the child was being, worked on. I noticed that Neil was screaming hysterically and he was, throwing himself on the floor. He was just so distraught. The medical staff down there had to take him over to the emergency room. Anthony Ojeda, he was down in one of the family rooms, and I had gone down there, to interview him because at that point we knew that the baby had a bump on his head. We weren't aware of any other injuries, and we wanted to know what's wrong with this child? He was telling us how the child was born premature. The mother had had some addiction problems, and the baby was addicted to like Adderall. He was told by the doctors that the baby was, going through withdrawal symptoms. Mentioned that like around 12:30, had set the child down for a nap, and I'd left the room, went back in 15 minutes, and noticed that the baby had vomited in the crib, and that's when he moved Eli from the crib and noticed that his legs were purple. So he described setting him down and kind of like moving his legs like a bicycle. He then noticed that his eyes kind of rolled back in his head. So that's when he had called Neil, who was at work. Soon as Neil saw the picture of Eli on the phone, he noticed his face was blue. He wasn't responsive. Neil went over to a nurse and said, showed the nurse that. The nurse was like, "Oh my God, call 911." So
did Neil work at a hospital?
So he worked at like a rehabilitation center.
Oh, okay.
In Troy, New York, and there was some nursing that were on staff.
Right. Okay.
In later interviews that we did, we know that Neil wasn't the one that called 911. It was one of his workers that he had taken out his driver's license, what had his address on there, handed it to the worker and said, "Call 911," and he was en route home.
Okay.
Back to the residence.
So Anthony never called.
Right.
My understanding, Anthony never, after handing off the child to EMS, stayed inside the residence. He didn't come out to the ambulance like you would think like a normal parent would be right there, or go down with the ambulance down to the hospital.
And Anthony and Neil had adopted baby Eli.
Anthony and Neil are married.
But how they ended up with baby Eli is still a very contentious issue. But DNA proved that he is not the biological father. There was some misrepresentation that took place, and that's a whole other issue as to how these two came to be in custody of the child.
Right.
Before this incident happened, I actually got called to that residence to do a check the welfare on the child with somebody who had concerns. You get calls that say check the welfare of somebody. It can be somebody they hadn't heard from in a while, whether an older relative or a friend. But this one, the people said, "Hey, these two people we know, they have a baby, and we don't think that they're good people." It wasn't a whole lot of detail to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first time going there. And when you went there and you knocked on the door, and again, this is a downtown location where they live. When you open up the door, I have rarely seen an apartment that was so immaculate. I don't want to stereotype it, but a lot of times, multifamily units and everything in that area, they just don't look like that. I've been in that building before, that unit and others. And I was like, wow, this place is immaculately clean, very well kept. Everything was nice and neat. And I explained to them what the call was about, and they didn't seem very concerned. And they actually showed me some paperwork that showed from family court, that they have custody of this child. Everything was in order with that. So there was really nothing else for us to do. We actually we checked on the infant. The infant was okay. They had everything in line to say, no, we are the people who are supposed to have custody of the child. That was all legitimate through family court. We checked the house. There was nothing dangerous or, harmful to the child that we could obviously see. So for that particular call, our job was done. And then later this transpires.
Right.
So, during our interview, all of a sudden, nursing staff had come in and said, "You need to get upstairs to the Ronald McDonald," which is a designated part of the pediatrics emergency room. When we got up there, there was multiple doctors and nurses around. And we watched the baby die. And then, sorry.
Sorry. A crime against an infant like this is almost unprecedented in Cohoes. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Correct.
I mean, thankfully, I think it's very rare, wherever you go. A 6-week-old infant it's extremely rare as far as I know, not just in Cohoes, but within the Capital District, whether it be New York State and even beyond. Those are particularly rare and particularly terrible things that happen.
How does that strike you?
I mean, it was terrible. I mean, there was nurses that were, crying themselves. In the meantime, you have Neil and Anthony that are hovered over the baby, hysterically crying. And I'm just looking at Detective Mike Green. I'm like, oh my God, we have to get them to come with us. So we gave them a short time. And then, we told them they need to come down to the station, that we need to do some further interviews. So when we have a homicide in Cohoes, we reach out to the New York State Police. They've always been great in assisting us. When we got back to the station, they were already there waiting for us. So between the two interviews, which lasted about 5 hours interviewing Neil, it wasn't until a couple hours through that we even learned about meth, possibly being introduced to the baby.
Does that come as a complete shock to you?
It does. We knew that there was a history of drug abuse with the mother, but we had no knowledge. Neither one of them had ever told us that maybe the baby had gotten into something.
But let's just say, apparently, they bought Baby Eli for $1,700 from the mother.
We don't know the exact dollar amount. So what we do know is that Anthony had gotten into an argument with Neil, had left the apartment, had went out that night and met a female, had a sexual relationship with her, got her pregnant. She later told Anthony that she was pregnant and that she didn't want to, keep the baby. And they were looking to adopt a child. So they kind of worked out an agreement, through talking with the mother. We know that she was staying in a hotel and that they were transferring money to her, to help her out. We don't have like an exact dollar amount, but we know that there was payments being made to her, to help her out with her housing and whatever else.
Is it safe to say she sold the baby?
Well, she would never admit to that.
She had lied about who the biological father was, and she had been receiving payments. So how did Baby Eli end up in Anthony and Neil's hands?
Yeah. So when she had given birth, they had an agreement worked out that once she gave birth, that Anthony would come down to the hospital and sign the birth certificate.
She was going to sign over the custody to Anthony as being the biological father, and Neil and Anthony were going to raise this child as their own.
Okay.
So when she had, she had the child at home, EMS transported to the hospital. She ended up leaving a short time later. We do have some, incident reports that, Troy PD did a welfare check on her after because she had left the hospital so soon. And, because of, a history that she had with Child Protective Service, they were heavily involved once the baby was born. We know that through family court that eventually Anthony and Neil were awarded custody of the child. But Anthony maintained that he was the father. He was the biological.
Right. And what was her history with other children?
He did have a few other children that were all involved in the, we call it CPS, which is a social system for child protective here in New York.
Right.
He did have cases going on with them.
So all of her children got taken away, and she sold Baby Eli to Anthony and Neil.
Yes.
Safe to say. And she had many substance abuse problems.
She had some substance abuse problems going on. So
Okay.
we did do a swab, a DNA test on her and the male that was found in the hotel room with her,
Right.
which later turned out to be the biological father.
And he didn't care that the baby had been given up either?
No, he didn't really care at all. He knew, he
Great.
thought that they could give him a better life.
I think that's the big part of it is she's part of the false pretense of how they get custody of the child, and we'll never know what would have happened otherwise. But she hands over this baby, and I think one of the things that Rob hit on that was important is she almost runs out of the hospital afterwards to the point the hospital staff wants to have somebody go check on her. She couldn't get away from this baby fast enough, and had made an arrangement with these people to just hand the child over to them. And they don't have any biological rights to the child or any other ones for that matter. And that's a big part, and maybe the biggest part as to how this happened. We won't know what would have happened if Eli had gone with somebody else. But I think that is important to stress not only what was the arrangement made, but she couldn't have got out of that hospital fast enough after giving birth and just basically, ditched this child, this baby.
After Baby Eli had passed, our coroner, Tim Kavanaugh, put on a free service for the baby and paid for everything. So we had actually went to that, and the mother was there in attendance. She was pretty emotional.
Right.
The mother also at the interview, when we interviewed the mom the next day, she became very overwhelmed and emotional. We had to call EMS, and she almost got a case of incarceritis, I think, and she thought she might have been in trouble. So she wanted to do the hospital route. So we had to call EMS in, have her checked out. There was really nothing wrong with her, but they transported her to the hospital anyway. So
Yeah, I'm not so sure we believe that her emotions were sincere. I mean, how could they be? I think the impression is that it was played up a lot, whether it be at the service or during Detective LeBombard's interview, where she thinks all of a sudden, whoa, am I going to be in trouble now? They know I basically handed this child over, false pretenses, lied, etc. I think she was more concerned with, is she going to be in any trouble, than she was any
Right.
genuine feelings.
And there were no charges ever brought against her.
There are not at this point. I
Right.
got to be honest with you. The issue of how things went down with CPS and family courts, I believe that's still out there somewhere. And I don't know how actively it's being looked into, but I would certainly hope they would look into it, because the one thing I said at the conclusion of this is, what prevents this from happening again?
Right.
Prevents somebody under those circumstances and saying, I want to sell my baby for this much money. And you go to family court, and if nobody objects, which my understanding is Anthony shows up, nobody objects, there you go. By default, you're given this infant, and there's no checks into anything. I can't understand a system that works that way.
Right. And how did the interview with Neil pan out?
We did a long, lengthy interview. He had told us that the night before, on that weekend, because this was a Tuesday, so on Saturday, that Anthony and him had got into an argument. He had went out and met a male through Grindr, which is like an dating app.
Yep.
Brought that male back to the house. That male had brought meth over to the house. That all three of them had engaged in, sexual intercourse. Over the next couple of days, Neil had called in sick to work because Anthony just stayed home with the baby.
Mm-hmm.
That they had just smoked meth. He later, told us that he didn't trust Anthony around the child, that Anthony was, being too rough with the child. He gave us two different instances, because we had mentioned to him that the child had broken ribs. One time when they were, asleep upstairs, the baby's crib was next to the bed, that Anthony got frustrated, reached over with his hand, grabbed the baby by the ribs, squeezed, and pulled the baby out of the crib. Another one was when they had went down for one of their appointments down at the hospital. He tried taking the baby out of the car seat, and he kind of ripped him out of the car seat where the child's arm got stuck in the strap.
Right.
He knew something was going to happen. So when we started talking about meth, one of the investigators from the state police had brought up a hypothetical. Says, well, hypothetically speaking, could have a piece of meth dropped on the couch next to the baby, and he went for it. That story changed multiple times, from a piece of meth on the couch to a piece of meth had gotten on to a burping cloth,
Right.
onto a pacifier. When we were interviewing, he had a bag inside the room, and when we asked him what was in the bag, there was a little blue pacifier in there. And he said maybe it had gotten on the pacifier. So we actually collected that and had that tested.
Uh-huh.
Neil ultimately admits to us that when he had arrived on scene, when the ambulance was there, that Anthony had told him that, I think the baby got into something. So, what bothers me the most is, had we known that there was any kind of drug that was introduced to the baby, we could have relayed that information, and it could have saved the baby's life. But, you got to realize, down at the hospital, they don't know what's wrong with the child.
Right.
Trying to get information from Anthony. He's not giving us anything. He's just sitting there. And he didn't shed a tear, or have any concern about the child when I was interviewing him.
Right.
So, between us up at the state police barracks in Latham and the Cohoes, doing the interview of Anthony, we were able to relay information about the meth back. One important thing that Neil did tell us is that when they were smoking meth, Anthony was smoking marijuana, and he did blow marijuana smoke in the baby's face, which he described as the baby changed when he did that. I know several days later we had re-interviewed Neil, and he admitted to Detective Green that he did catch Anthony blowing, methamphetamine smoke in the baby's face.
Uh-huh.
Didn't they present that as a way of calming down the child when the child would be upset or distressed? And in their twisted mind, given where the baby came from and the mother's habits, it was like they were justifying that as a way of, oh, the baby's upset and crying, and what normal people would do in that situation. They felt this was the solution for that.
Right.
We ended up charging Anthony. We knew we had the assault second, which is causing serious physical injury.
Right.
That's a felony charge. And without toxicology, so A safe charge for that would be manslaughter. The next day is when I responded down to the hospital and we did an autopsy of the child. They actually brought an x-ray machine into the autopsy, and I did actually see the broken ribs with a pathologist.
Mm-hmm.
I took Anthony before the judge for his arraignment. It was like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And the only thing he was concerned about, he asked me about 4 times about making bail.
Right.
He said that he had a credit card or something that he can make his bail. That's all he kept asking about.
So he's arrested for manslaughter. The judge says no bail. You're staying. And the reason he was charged with manslaughter and nothing higher than that has to do with intent, as far as I understand.
Right. We didn't have the toxicology report, so we don't have.
So at this point, we don't know intent. And if you don't have clear intent, then you're charging with manslaughter.
Correct.
And it was heinous enough that the judge said absolutely no bail.
Correct.
And then the next bomb drops, and that's on January 1st, 2020. I'll just say some well-intentioned, because I have to believe that it was, some well-intentioned politicians in the New York State government put something into effect to make it easier for people with presumably very, very low-level crimes to get out of jail with no cash bail, to maybe even the scales of justice and not keep somebody behind bars for a pretty minor charge. But that didn't turn out to be the case, did it, Chief?
No, it didn't. They basically dictated to judges that they could no longer make the decision based on all the different factors, threat to society, recidivism, and the means to be able to make bail. They basically told them, you will release these people with these particular charges.
So there's no judge's discretion.
Exactly. They took discretion away from the judges for these instances. And this is a clear case of that. It actually became a poster for those who were fighting against bail reform. Shortly after this happened, posters went up across New York State from people that were opposed to these bail reform measures that have been put in place. And they put Anthony Ojeda on there and said, these are the kinds of people that you're saying, deserve to have these opportunities and shouldn't be held while the case is being adjudicated.
I thought it was low-level offenses. I get a list of the offenses for which there is no cash bail. So I just want to, for 1 second, because I think this is extraordinary. So obviously there's manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide. These are things, again, that you do not go to jail for. Prostitution of a minor, somebody under 13 years old, you don't go to jail. There is no bail. You can riot. You can kill a police dog. You can resist arrest. And the list goes on and on. There's probably about 200 offenses that I'm looking at right now. Chief, what do you think about that? And how did that affect Cohoes?
It affected us. It affected everybody in this area, and it affected the entirety of New York State. Criminals learn what new laws have been put in place, and they adapt to them. And it wasn't very long before people realized, I can do these things and I can get out. And they would tell us while they were being arrested, I know I'll be out. And like you mentioned, there's a long list. And some of those charges, I can say I don't have much of an issue with if somebody gets released, on the belief that they'll return to court.
Right.
You don't need to have a law degree, and you don't need to have gone to a police academy. When you look at the term manslaughter, all you need to do is have common sense. When you break that down, it tells you itself what took place. And for that to be considered on the list of charges where bail is not to be set is just completely absurd.
And did you ever talk to any politicians that were involved with this?
I did on numerous occasions. I've talked with Albany County District Attorney's Office, who was in agreement with this. I have talked to some of our other politicians on the state level and voiced what those problems are. And they say, similar to what you said, it was well-intentioned, but the ones I've spoken to have acknowledged that certain things need to be fixed and there needs to be some changes made.
And have those changes been made?
They've made some, but not very many. It's been a small amount. One of the ones about firearms, at one point, a politician had told me, yeah, it's absurd that you have to have, I think it was 10 or more firearms to be considered. It should be 3. And I'm raising my hand like, what about 1 illegally owned loaded firearm should maybe count? Why do we have to get to the number of 3 or 10? to me, it defies logic, much like this particular case did. And you make a good point. This happened during bail reform. I mean, you couldn't get any closer of a time frame from December, arrested, sent to the Albany County Jail to be held like he should have been, to a month later released. And that's why I think a lot of people took it as the example of how this was already failing within its first month being implemented. And there has not been near enough changes made to remedy the problems that this has caused.
Right. So on January 1st, 2020, a man who unintentionally kills a 6-week-old, who we know has broken some of his ribs and probably injured him in other ways, who's also blown meth smoke and marijuana smoke in a 6-week-old face, gets released from jail.
Yes, I think the case was heard on January 1st, and he's actually released on January 6th.
And shock of shockers, what does he do?
I was always asking for the updates with this case, and he was constantly appearing in court. And every time I would get the update as to what happened, there was always a delay. It was, he's ready to plead to this. He's kind of playing an angle if he doesn't understand English very well. That threw a curveball into things. We had a lot of proof that he understood English and understood what everybody was saying. So that was what I consider to be his first card that he played. Then he would say, I'm going to plead guilty to the manslaughter charge. And so that went on for a few months. Then he shows up in court, and that's supposed to be what happens. And he says, I cannot plead to this. I'm going to blame my husband for it now. And so the judge says, rightfully so, I can't accept your plea. He's all of a sudden said it wasn't him.
Right.
So I saw that as, I think this is somebody who is playing a game, and he knows as long as he shows up and he's a free person in the interim, he's going to get to the point where he realizes, I've got no more cards to play. And at that point, he's going to go. I just did not see him going in there at any point. Once he made that last statement of putting it on to Neil, I said, this isn't going to end with him agreeing to take a plea or him, going along with the court process.
Right. So on August 21st, then Cahoes is notified. What?
We were down for the guilty plea. We had indicted him on murder second and braved indifference for life. So they had offered him a plea agreement of 4 to 12 years. He was supposed to plead guilty. So when we went down there, his defense attorney wanted him to have the weekend to think about it and to come back on Monday morning to plead guilty on Monday morning. And I remember the judge saying he's had 2 years to take care of weekend affairs. My offer stands till, I believe it was 2:00 in the afternoon. If not, we have a trial day set. We're going to trial. So then 2:00 came, we were all down there, and his defense attorney said that he's taken to trial. But since he had made all his other court appearances, he was again released with ankle monitor back to probation.
And over the course of a couple of days, the true state of affairs is slowly revealed.
They had sold their vehicles to some family friends, I believe in Connecticut. They had come into the station to report that they received a call from Anthony, and it came from an Ohio number. And they knew that he had a court case going on. And Anthony had told them that they don't live in Cahoes anymore and that they wouldn't be there. Those family friends had talked to some other people who said, you need to report that to the police. They ended up coming into the station with the license plates to the vehicles, and they had keys to the apartment. So they went down and checked the apartment and said, it looks like they took off. Their dogs weren't there. We had notified the district attorney's office that we believed that they had fled. They set up 2 court appearances within that week. Anthony did not show up to those court appearances. So the judge issued a warrant for their arrest.
So the apartment's clean and they've taken off.
We had information that they had rented a car. I know Detective Green had done some plate read hits on that car. One of the plate readers had hit in a different state. So we had pretty good reason to believe that they had fled.
Is it normal to then go to the Marshals Service, see if they'll adopt the case now that it's left the state of New York? And since you're a relatively small police department, you guys need additional resources.
Yes.
And you're not letting this case go?
No.
So when it was brought to our attention, we work 40 to 50 homicide cases a year in upstate New York. And this one immediately stuck out to us. You got a baby killed, right? You got people who are responsible for it have fled the area. You got a PD, in this case, Coast PD, who's been a great partner, who's asking for help. So this was an easy, like, yes, this is an all hands on deck effort. How do we help these guys out? And let's make this a priority for our organization as well.
Right.
And that's kind of how it helped us orient and kicked it off.
And with as many heinous cases as the marshals deal with, this was still something that is just so unusual.
Oh yeah, shocking to the core. I mean, just the idea of you got a 6-week-old infant, you got methamphetamines involved, you got the injuries to the infant, you got the background with the biological mom, and then who's the dad, who's not. You got wanted people who were naturalized U.S. citizens but born in other countries. So you got all these facts that are involved here. The other thing too that was going through my mind is timing's important, right? And we're already a couple days behind type thing, right? So we want to jump on this and try to figure that out rather quickly, because if they left the U.S., it makes things a little more challenging. And then, of course, it just tugs at the heartstrings, right? When you got a 6-week-old infant that's been killed. So you want to do everything you can. I mean, many of us have children. And when you think of something like that happening to such a innocent, defenseless infant at that age, it's just horrific. It was easy to say yes to the case, all hands on deck effort. So now we do our initial investigative workup, figuring out who's who, right? Who are their close associates? Who are the family members? Where are they from? How do they communicate? Do they have a electronic footprint? Are they on social media? Who are they close to? Where did they work? What did they have for vehicles?
Their pattern of life, their support network.
That's correct. And one of those investigative options available to us is a UFAP, which is an acronym for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. That is a federal warrant. And given that we had indicators that there was out-of-state flight, that allowed us to pursue a federal arrest warrant for that unlawful flight, right?
Right.
That also gives us access to criminal process at the federal level, whether that's subpoenas or court orders or search warrants, right? That gives us greater access to those tools, those investigative tools, should we need them. And we did. We needed them in this particular case. One of the other investigative tools available to us was elevating this to a major case within the Marshal Service, right? So rather than like a routine case, elevated to a major case.
What's the criteria to elevate something to a major case?
It's something that's going to be important and meaningful to our area and the law enforcement agencies involved in the case. Perhaps, that there are very egregious elements. The dangerousness of the wanted offenders would certainly be a factor as well.
And that gets you additional resources?
It does, both at headquarters. It also gives us additional resources when it comes to reward monies that are available. Mm-hmm. And it helped facilitate other facets of the investigation as well.
Got it. Guess this will start with the manhunt.
So immediately, obviously, because we knew they were both naturalized citizens in the U.S., but they were obviously born in other countries. Ojeda was from Mexico, and Garzon was from Ecuador. So I got in contact with actually a really good investigator with ICE here. I sent him the information immediately on Ojeda and Neil. And we come to find out that Ojeda has ties to Mexico and the Yonkers area. So, because he had old addresses in Yonkers. So we kind of realized that we need to focus on those two areas because there wasn't much here in Cohoes. They didn't really have a social group. So when we started digging more, we got a hit on the rental car that they had in their possession. It hit out in Missouri. When we looked into it more, it was rented by a female in Yonkers, New York. So again, we have that connection to the city. We knew we had to head to Yonkers. We knew there's people to interview down there. In the meantime, we're still looking at the Mexico side of it. So we head down to interview two females. One was the female that rented the car. She never met Ojeda face to face ever. She became friends with him through other friends. And for some reason, Ojeda and them would reach out to her for money over the years and just basically use them for stuff. And, she would help them when she could. So she helped them rent that car. She co-signed for it. And then we find out at some point she was also asked to send them money via Cash App. I think it was $30. She was upset about the whole car. It really went down because she's out of the money now. She's now on the hook for the car. And the car's nowhere to be found. When we asked her about any other people to interview or anyone else that where they would go, especially because we knew ahead of time that the car plate hit out in Missouri, She said that she doesn't know where, but she believes that they would head to Mexico because he's extremely close to his mother who lives in Mexico. After that interview concluded, we went and talked to another female in the city. And during her interview, we learned that Ojeda on the 17th called her and said, I'm in Yonkers. I want to meet up with you. I want to give you some of our stuff because we're leaving the area. She admitted to us she knew that they were in trouble for the baby dying, but that's all she really knew about the case. She said she wasn't comfortable with meeting them at her place, so she met them at a Burger King in Yonkers, and that's where they gave her their dog. She thought it was pretty telling that they were gone for good. After that, that's when they left Yonkers, and she said she did not hear from them ever again. We tried to track down that car after the hit in Callaway County, Missouri. So that was the 17th is when they met with her in the Yonkers. On the 19th is when the LPR, the license plate reader, hit in Missouri. To this day, we don't know where that car went. The car never hit another plate reader. And it's never, I know the rebuild company was still trying to find it. To my knowledge, they have not recovered where that car went after they hit Missouri.
Right.
So now we're at a, kind of, this is where the case kind of hit a low. We did our interviews. We knew they were out in the Missouri area, but we had no other leads on where they could be heading besides knowing mom lived in Mexico.
And that's common during a manhunt where not everything is leading from one to the next, that there will be lulls or a series of dead ends.
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of where we're at, a little bit of standstill. To go back to, talk about the pattern of life, one thing that stood out for me and why we kind of, once we were done with the Yonkers interviews, we were like, all right, we need to hammer and focus on Mexico. When ICE gave us their immigration file for both of them, because they're in a same-sex marriage, they were telling our, the U.S. officials that they could not safely live in their country because of that.
Right.
So they needed to be citizens and to flee and basically come here to America.
Right.
Well, looking at their file, once they became naturalized, they traveled back to Mexico tons of times. They were going back and forth. They were visiting mom. So, obviously it was a farce. It looked
right.
Their citizenship. So that pattern of life showed us that they're comfortable in Mexico. They're nothing to be worried about. If that was true, they would have never gone back once they left.
Check.
We sent the lead to our Mexico foreign field office to get them involved, just to see if they can run some checks to see, because we had mom's address from the immigration file, so we knew where mom lived, or at least kind of thought where she lived.
Right.
So we just sent a initial lead, nothing substantial, but just to see if they had anything they could assist us on.
Just to say that the Marshal Service has several field offices around the world, and Mexico happens to be one of them.
They are an extremely busy office.
Right. Because people think they're going to go down to Mexico and disappear.
Absolutely. So during our investigation, while we're trying to figure out where they were going or how they were going to get out there, we leaned on Cohoes PD tremendously. They got us, anytime we need a subpoena or court order, they were our go-to for this.
Right.
So one of the things they did for us was we knew Neil Garcon had a credit card in his name. We had that information and we did some checks on there. And we knew at one point in August, they around the 19th, they used his credit card at a gas station in Lebo, Kansas.
Okay.
That's right around the same timetable as the plate reader hit in Callaway County, Missouri. We know they're heading in that direction from New York.
So before we go down to Mexico, the toxicology report comes back and reveals what to Cohoes PD?
That it was an acute methamphetamine overdose.
Okay. So baby Eli, 6 weeks old, ODs on methamphetamines.
Correct.
And what is the speculation of how baby Eli ingested meth?
That he had been given the methamphetamine.
So Anthony Ojeda most likely gave a 6-week-old baby methamphetamine, and the baby OD'd and passed away from that.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, it's inconceivable, obviously. And I've now done almost 40 podcasts. And it's one of the most awful things I've ever heard. What was your feeling when you heard that?
I mean, there's a lot of anger that, that we had. Very difficult case to be part of.
You
Yeah.
know, and I was very pissed off that fact that we found out 9 months later that it was a methamphetamine overdose, where like Detective Piazza said early on, if they told us that day at the hospital, they could have maybe given the baby something to correct that at that point and try to save its life. But they were too selfish for that.
And perhaps you would have been able to prove intent and he never would have gotten bail.
Yes, exactly.
Anthony, Stu, when you guys heard about that he actually gave the baby meth, what was your reaction to that? I mean, it's so hard for me to comprehend such a thing.
To me, when you have an individual who has the capacity to do something as shocking as that, you know, what else do they have the capacity for, right? Like clearly it's somebody that needs to be off the street before, you know, we don't even know what other victims are out there, right? Or before that next victimization occurs.
During this whole time, we were trying to locate them. Neil was not wanted for this. This was just Ojeda. But once we put the pieces together that he was with them and he was obviously helping because his credit card, the car, you know, the rental car. So Cahoes did a great job where we asked them to get some charges on Neil as well.
Right.
So Neil was now wanted.
Great. So this case now crosses an international border. Is the Mexican law enforcement system set up to deal swiftly with a case as heinous as this one that originated in the U.S.? How many hoops are there to jump through? How much bureaucratic red tape are you going to have to deal with to try to get a Mexican citizen extradited back to the U.S.?
We're at the earliest stages. So there's a requirement by the Mexican courts and also by DOJ. It's called the discrete locate. We have to establish a discrete locate early on to confirm that this person is in Mexico. So there we go. All right, Sal, start doing it up. All we have is a dump car at the border and one last phone call or so in the interior of Mexico somewhere. And that's it. Coupled with, we have mother's information in this area of Mexico.
You don't have her exact address.
No, I, at that point, reached out to our contacts in Mexico. We had worked a couple of cases for Mexico City Police Department where they needed help on their cases. And they had a pretty egregious case where some girl got acid thrown in her face. And it was just, so we helped them out on that case. And we were trying to reach out to them. And they're like, hey, the area you want to work in, our office has a hard time going in there.
Why is that?
Because it was like this area, it's called Tepito. And if you could just imagine like 5 square miles or 4 square miles of just tent city with storefronts, and it's all just everybody selling anything and everything. It's just out of a movie. And all the streets are crammed together. There's just hundreds of people walking all over the place. And we had, information that mom was in this area.
Do the Mexican police not want to go in there? I mean, is there a danger level to go? Because so far what you described doesn't necessarily seem dangerous.
So there's this paradigm. It's all controlled, right? Once the lights go off, you don't want to be there. You don't want to walk around the streets. You're going to get either mugged or the people disappear from that neighborhood all the time.
And who controls that neighborhood?
The local gangs tied into the local cartels. We kind of just know that through our general briefings that we understand that everything's controlled. Nothing there does not move without someone knowing something, or so once law enforcement shows up or starts asking any questions in these areas, it doesn't take very long before folks find out, which we found out pretty quick. Within, I was into about a month, and I kind of gave up on using the PD. We said, you know what, thank you, excuse you guys, we're gonna have to try something else. So we reached out to our Interpol guys, our Mexican federal guys, and said, hey, look, it hasn't arrived to your office yet, but we need to establish the discrete locate. I had to take them to lunch and explain this case to them. And they're shaking their heads like, are you serious? I said, yeah.
Because again, nobody goes in there.
Yeah. Once again, nobody goes in there, and they're like, okay. They said, all right, we'll work it. And how important is it? And I'm like, as important as the boss on speakerphone he's asking for this case to be worked, like right now, like, whatever you can do. At that point, I said, hey, listen, here's what we got. We got mom. She's in here. She's in this neighborhood somewhere, somehow. If you can find her, let's get it done. A few weeks later, I get a call and they said, hey, we found mom. We found her identity. She's, selling cigarettes, whatever. Did you see our fugitives? They said, no, but we've got a good beat on mom. We start telling them, well, as soon as we identify him, let us know.
And the reason you need to identify him is not only to find him, but it's a chicken and egg thing going on with the legal process.
The district attorney can apply for an extradition warrant all they want, but the Office of International Affairs, our U.S. attorneys up at Washington, D.C., not only will they say as well, okay, does this case meet the threshold for filing in Mexico due to, according to Mexican laws, whatever nuances or whatever, legalities that they have to meet. For the marshals, they're asking us that, has there been a location of this guy, of this fugitive in Mexico? We have to say yes or no. And the reason why is because what's to say he didn't end up in another country?
Right.
And now we're wasting time in Mexico.
It makes it very hard for you to go work a case then.
Yeah, it does.
If you don't have a warrant for extradition and they're saying, well, is the fugitive there? And you're like, I don't know. We're going to find out if the fugitive is there. But if we find the fugitive, then we want to be able to extradite him.
Right. So they said, hey, look, we'll keep working it. We speed up the clock. Like a few months later, they said, hey, we have a source who is from that little area. He's a good guy. I said, okay, let him work. Let him find him. So now they have boots on the ground. They're spot checking mom. They're trying to follow her home. They finally find where she's staying at. They try to rent a place down the street, but they can't really see who comes in and out. Nobody seems to come in and out of the residence. Speed up another few more weeks. Hey, guess what? They think they saw Anthony Ojeda come up to the door and go back in.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to try something. At that point, I said, hey, listen, can you swear to the fact that you guys saw him? Have your guy take a picture of Ojeda. Okay. I need to see a picture. And I said, and now I'm getting excited. A few days later, they came up with a plan to go to the door and use some type of kind of disguise, saying that they were there helping out, working with the some type of government or state or a private program that gives out food and relief, like, toiletries and it worked. So they opened the door, and who opens the door? Ojeda. Not only do they take a picture of Ojeda, they take a picture of a garçon who pops out of another room.
Right.
And these guys look like they don't come out. I said, perfect. As soon as we get that information back, I said, hey, Anthony, Logan, DC, hey, brother, hey, guess what? I just made your day. He goes, what? And I goes, check your email. And he's like, oh my God, that's them. That's them. I said, yep. But hey, start working on it. And I don't know if that was a year and a half before the extradition warrant was actually, signed by a Mexican judge.
Okay, so they're found. They are found. It's as easy as putting them in cuffs and taking them on a plane or driving over the border. This is it. Done.
Can't pass go though. We cannot pass go. They're right there.
Why can't we pass go, Anthony?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It should have been as easy as, all right, let's go get him, but it was not.
It definitely was not. And that's where we're going to have to leave this episode. In part 2, you'll see how frustrating the system is and how perseverance finally pays off. And if you have a moment, this is the part I ask you to please go to Apple or Spotify and give us a 5-star rating and write a glowing review. And, of course, tell your friends about us. It's pretty unusual to have a podcast where you're hearing from the people in law enforcement who are at the tip of the spear. We're just trying to grow this thing so we could really use your help. So thanks very much in advance. And finally, Chasing Evil is produced with the cooperation of the U.S. Marshals Service. It contains interviews with current and retired employees as well as other persons. Opinions, positions, and views expressed by any of them may not reflect the official views, positions, or policies of the United States Marshals Service. Stay safe, everyone.